At 72, I put 2 cloves in my coffee every morning, and my erection came back like I was 30. My name is Raymond. I'm 72 years old. I live outside Beaumont, Texas, in a house with a front porch that looks out over a stretch of pine trees. My second wife, Darlene, says she could stare out all day. Last Tuesday night was the third time this week, and on Sunday morning, before the coffee was even done, it was the fourth. I am 72 years old. I'm not telling you this to brag. I don't have the temperament for that, and I never did. I'm telling you because 4 years ago, the number was zero, and I had accepted, quietly, the way you accept a bad knee or a hearing aid, that zero was going to be the number for the rest of my life. What I didn't understand then is that the problem wasn't age. It wasn't even really the body failing. It was something specific, something mechanical, something that can be worked on, that I found my way to by accident, through a cup of coffee, of all things. If any part of that sounds familiar, that quiet resignation, that slow disappearing from a part of yourself, I want you to stay with me until the end of this. Because what changed everything for me isn't at the beginning of the story. It comes later, and I think it might matter to you. There's a particular kind of silence that falls between a man and a woman when that part of the relationship stops working. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens the way a river dries up, slowly, then completely. And then you look one day and there's just a dry bed where something used to flow. I noticed it first on a Saturday morning in early October, about 5 years ago. Darlene and I had been married 8 years. I woke up and there was nothing, not even a flicker. I told myself it was the long run I'd made to Houston and back the day before. I was tired, that was all. But it kept being all. Morning after morning. Then weeks. Then I stopped counting, which is its own kind of admission. I drove trucks for 31 years, and one thing you learn in that line of work is how to be alone with a problem. You sit with it in the cab at 2 in the morning, and you figure out whether it's something you can fix or something you just have to carry. I decided this was the second kind. I was 68 years old, I told myself. The expectation that a man my age should still function that way was itself the problem. What I didn't tell Darlene was that it wasn't only the bedroom. The energy had gone quiet too. I'd be in the recliner by 3 in the afternoon without the will to stand. My hands, which used to be steady, had started shaking some in the mornings. And there was a heaviness in my chest I can only describe as the feeling of something slowly being switched off. I went to see my GP, Dr. Harmon, down in Beaumont. He checked my blood pressure, ran some blood work, looked at me over his glasses, and said I was in fine shape for my age. He offered me a prescription, one of those pills you take before. I filled it. I took it twice. It worked the way a defibrillator works. It forced the thing to happen without addressing a single thing about why it wasn't happening on its own. And it gave me a headache that lasted a day and a half and made me feel like a fraud in my own body. I didn't refill the prescription. I put the remaining pills in the back of the bathroom cabinet, and I went back to accepting zero as the number. What I didn't know, and what nobody in that office thought to mention, was that the problem had a name, and the name wasn't age. My daughter's name is Patrice. She's 44, lives in Dallas, works in physical therapy. She came down to visit on a long weekend, and we were sitting on the porch on the second morning with our coffee, just the two of us, and she asked me if I was all right. I said I was fine. She said, "Daddy, you look like a man who's been carrying something heavy for a long time." Patrice has her mother's directness, and sometimes that combination stops me cold. I told her, careful as I could, that there were things that hadn't been working the way they used to. She asked what the doctor had said, and I told her about Dr. Harmon's pills, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I've turned over many times since. She said, "The pills don't fix the pipes, they just force pressure through them. If the pipes are narrowed, you're working against the plumbing." She didn't give me a solution that morning. She gave me the right question. She asked if I'd ever looked at what actually keeps the vascular system flexible and responsive, what those vessels need, what keeps them clear. I hadn't. I'd thought about this as a switch. Either it works or it doesn't. Patrice gave me the idea that there was a mechanism, that there were inputs, that the system could be worked on from the inside. I drove her to the airport 2 days later, and on the way home, I stopped at a bookstore. I sat in the parking lot and read the first 3 chapters before I drove home. Then I went to the kitchen, made a cup of coffee, dropped 2 whole cloves in while it was brewing, and sat on the porch until it was dark. That was the beginning. Now, the cloves. I want to explain why they matter, because it's easy to hear put cloves in your coffee and think it sounds like something from a Facebook post by someone's grandmother. I thought the same thing at first. The system that controls an erection is a vascular system, plumbing. Blood has to move into a particular network of small vessels that, when healthy and responsive, fill and hold. When that system is working, the vessels dilate and the blood arrives. When it isn't, the vessels have narrowed over the years, stiffened. They've become less responsive to the signals the brain sends. The brain says go, and the message arrives weakly, or not at all. Cloves contain a compound, I won't try the scientific name because I'm a truck driver, not a chemist, that acts on the walls of those vessels. It encourages them to relax, to open. Think of an old garden hose left in the sun for 10 years. The rubber has hardened, it kinks, it doesn't carry water the way it once did. Cloves help that hose become more like a new hose. Not overnight, but consistently, over weeks and months, the flexibility begins to return. A university in Sweden looked at what affected blood flow in the small vessels of older men, specifically the peripheral vascular network, which includes the vessels in that particular area. And cloves were among a handful of natural compounds that showed consistent effect on vessel wall relaxation, without the crash that comes from forcing the system pharmacologically. The mistake most men make is they use ground cloves from the spice rack, usually 2 years old. Most of what matters already gone. You need whole cloves. Drop 2 of them into the hot coffee while it's brewing. Cover it for 4 or 5 minutes and drink. Not boiled, not steeped cold, just dropped into the hot coffee and left there. I've done this every morning for 3 years. Now, before I go on, I want to ask you to hit subscribe and leave a like on this video. I know how that sounds, but this kind of information doesn't travel through regular channels. It doesn't come from a doctor's office. If you found it useful, clicking that button puts it in front of someone else who needs it. That's the only reason I'm asking. And there's something else I need to tell you. Something I held back for a long time. I don't trust supplements. I want to be direct about that. My father used to say the only thing that changes in patent medicine is the label. I believed it. I still believe it applies to most of what's on the shelf. I watched medicine fail to answer this problem for 4 years. Tried the prescription, talked to the doctor, did everything the conventional path offered. And I had concluded firmly that if the system designed to treat this couldn't treat it, then a capsule from the internet certainly wasn't going to. Patrice called one Sunday afternoon when I was about 4 months into the cloves and a few other things I'd added. The situation had improved, meaningfully, but there was still a ceiling. She mentioned 2 things she'd come across in the literature from her work. One was an oriental plant called horny goatweed, used for about 2,000 years, she said, with documented natural vasodilatory action. The other was an antioxidant that works specifically on blood vessels, reducing the kind of slow, silent inflammation that narrows them over years. She mentioned them matter-of-factly, the way she mentions most things. She said the research behind them was solid, and that they worked on exactly the mechanism I'd been addressing with the cloves. I told her I wasn't taking a supplement. She said she knew. She said, just look at the testing documentation. I looked. I read the lab reports, not the marketing, the actual certification pages. I sat with my skepticism, and I turned it over and I set it down. I started taking it. About 4 weeks in, something shifted in the mornings. I don't know how to say it more plainly than that. Not dramatic. No single morning where everything was different, but one morning, early, before Darlene woke up, I noticed the body doing something it hadn't done in years. I lay there in the dark, not expecting anything, and when I noticed it, The feeling wasn't happiness exactly, it was closer to amazement, like discovering a room in your house you'd forgotten was there. The link is in the description if you want to look. Read it carefully. Decide at your own pace. The second thing I added was movement. Not cardio, not the treadmill. Specifically the hips and the pelvis. And the reason is where the blood has to go. There is a network of vessels and muscles in the pelvic region that, in most men over 60, has been dormant for years, tightened from decades of sitting, in a truck cab, in a desk chair, in an armchair. When muscles tighten, the vessels inside them compress. Blood flow slows. The system that depends on that blood flow slows with it. The practice is simple enough that I'm almost embarrassed to describe it. A physical therapist Patrice recommended in Beaumont had me lie flat on the floor, knees bent, feet flat, and slowly raise and lower my hips in a controlled arc. 15 repetitions, twice a day. That's it. But the mechanism is real. Every rise of the hip sends a wave of blood into the pelvic basin. Done consistently, the vessels in that region begin to wake up. A study out of Boston found that men who did pelvic floor exercises for 6 months saw substantial improvement in function. The researcher was quoted as saying he was surprised the medical community hadn't adopted it more broadly. I wasn't surprised. The exercise is free. The mistake is doing it too fast. The whole point is blood movement, not muscle fatigue. Slow and deliberate. You should feel warmth, not strain. Give it 6 weeks before you expect to notice anything. The third thing was cold water at the end of a warm shower, not an ice bath. 30 seconds of cool water directed at the lower abdomen and thighs, at the very end. The warm shower opens the vessels. The cool water causes a quick contraction. That cycling, dilation, and contraction is exercise for the vessel walls themselves. A Norwegian study on thermal variation in older men found that those who did this consistently showed improved vessel elasticity over 12 weeks. Vessel elasticity is the whole game. Start the cool gradually. Dial it down over 10 seconds, not all at once. 30 seconds, then done. I've done it every morning for 3 years, and I credit it more than people expect when I mention it. The fourth and simplest thing was sleep. Real sleep. Not 6 hours, not 5. The body produces its natural testosterone almost entirely while you sleep. Not during the day, not during exercise. During the hours when it can allocate resources to what doesn't happen while you're awake. I was sleeping badly for years. Up twice a night, awake at 3 in the morning with old worries. I set a consistent bedtime regardless of the day. No screens after 9, a cup of chamomile tea around 8:30, the bedroom at 67 degrees, and 5 minutes of deliberate breathing before lying down. 4 counts in, hold 2, 6 counts out. That breathing pattern lowers cortisol, and elevated cortisol is one of the fastest ways to suppress what the body would otherwise produce during sleep. Within 6 weeks, I was sleeping like I hadn't slept since my 40s. Now, everything I just described, I used to think that was the whole answer. It's maybe 30% of it. The other 70 was something I hadn't wanted to look at. I had been angry for a long time. Not in a way that showed. I wasn't a yeller. I was a quiet man carrying a quiet weight. The years of my first wife Frances's illness, the grief after that I'd managed by simply working through it without processing it. 31 years of being the man who showed up, handled things, asked for nothing. That kind of sustained carrying has a cost in the body. Not emotional, chemical. Chronic, suppressed stress keeps the body in a permanent low-grade emergency state, and a body in emergency mode does not invest in what it considers non-essential. Testosterone is non-essential when the body believes it's fighting a war. A researcher at Ohio State found that men with chronically elevated stress hormones had significantly lower circulating testosterone than men with similar health profiles who manage their stress differently. Not the intensity of the stress, the duration. Long, low, grinding stress is what the body eventually stops recovering from. What I did was drive out to a stretch of road I knew from the old days, park at a pull-off I used to stop at on runs, and sit there for an hour. I started, quietly and without any plan, speaking out loud to the things I'd been carrying. Francis. The years I worked too much when Patrice was small. The ways I'd held back in my second marriage because I was afraid of losing something else I loved. I cried that afternoon, and I drove home lighter in a way I can't fully explain. The practical thing I'd offer, just what I did, is to find a place that belongs only to you and sit in it without a phone or a plan and ask yourself what you've been carrying but you haven't named. Not to solve it, just to name it. The naming does something, and feeling needed, genuinely needed, is its own kind of medicine. Since Darlene started noticing the change in me, not just in the bedroom, but in how I sit at a table, how I laugh, how I'm present in a room, I felt a purpose I had let drift away from me. That purpose lives in the cortisol. It lives in the hormones. The internal state is not separate from the physical state. They're the same state, seen from different angles. I'm Raymond. I'm 72 years old. I live outside Beaumont, Texas, on a piece of land I share with a woman I love. I still drive sometimes, not for work, just down to the coast and back on a morning when I need to think. And on most mornings, I wake up in a body that feels not young exactly, but alive, turned back on. The thing I've come to believe is simple. The body doesn't forget how to work. It loses access to the conditions in which it can work. Give it the conditions, and it remembers. I want to ask you something. Leave the answer in the comments if you're willing. When you first noticed something had shifted in your body, did you say anything to anyone? Or did you keep it entirely to yourself? I ask because I kept mine to myself for 4 years, and I've always wondered if that silence is as common as I think it is. There is a window that closes slowly, and most men don't notice it closing until it's already most of the way shut. I don't say that to frighten anyone. The tissue that responds to this kind of support, the vessel walls, the pelvic circulation, all of it, responds better when you start before another 5 years pass. Not dramatically better, but meaningfully. That's not a sales line. It's what the body does with time. What more time without acting looks like is ordinary and quiet. More mornings of lying still. More years of feeling capable everywhere except where it matters most. That's the real cost. Not catastrophe, just more of the same. In a slow accumulation you eventually stop noticing. What I described in this video, and what I found in the description, work together. Neither one alone completed the job for me. Both were part of the same path. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Read it. Look at the testing documentation if you're the kind of man who needs to see it before he trusts anything. I was that man. Then decide. The men I've known who came back from where I was, and I've known a few now, they all had one thing in common. They decided to act before they were completely sure it would work. Because waiting for certainty, at our age, is just another name for waiting.